Cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. Sounds good to you? Likely it does. Certainly sounds good to me and a hell of a lot of other Americans. We need to cut ridiculous spending, waste, fraud, and abuse to make America a more financially responsible country. I don't think that's a bad idea, and I'm certainly you don't either. However, I'm going to plead ignorance on this one here because this sounds like selective outrage to me. Give you this story, and you can let me know in the comments how this makes sense, because I'm baffled, and for me, it makes no sense at all. Now, we know Elon Musk is the one that's been doing most of the cutting of waste, fraud, and abuse as the head of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Whether he wants to admit he's the head of it or not, I think it's pretty obvious. And President Trump has given him his blessing to do so. Cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, not necessarily a bad idea. But I want to talk to you about this from a standpoint of Pete Hegseth, head of the DOD, I'm sure you've heard of him, is on a conquest to rename bases, military bases that were originally named after perceived Confederate heroes back to their names again. Now, we know Obama and Joe Biden were not a big fan of maintaining these names that were named after Confederate heroes or whatever the hell. I'm going to say perceived Confederate heroes because some of you folks do view them as heroes. Other folks view them as atrocious slave owners, like Bragg. Fort Bragg, that base was named after a Confederate general that was also a slave owner. Now, there is a law. We won't go too deep into this because we did a previous video about this, but there is a law that prevents renaming bases after Confederate heroes that exist that came from the Biden administration. But to get around that, to rename the base back after a Confederate general that it was once named after, because Fort Benning is another one, what they're doing is picking another member from the military that had the same last name and naming it after him. So the base still remains Fort Bragg, but it's officially named after a different guy with the last name of Bragg. So they're naming the bases back. A lot of folks are okay with that, maybe thought that renaming bases away from Confederate, generals and all of this shit was too woke or whatever the hell you want to call it, similar to taking down Confederate statues and all of that. A lot of folks like what Trump is doing and Pete Hegseth are doing, is renaming these bases. In addition to Fort Bragg, they also just renamed Fort Benning. And even things like Black Lives Matter Way, you've heard about that was in Washington, D.C. I'm sure a hell of a lot of my MAGA viewers are happy to see Black Lives Matter Plaza getting taken down. We'll talk about that. But what I want to point out to you is this. We talked about waste, fraud, and abuse and how any of this shit may make sense. An AP article suggested that the Naming Commission, this is a federal outfit, estimated that to rename Fort Bragg to what they named it to get it away from the Confederate name in 2022 was going to cost $4.9 million. $4.9 million in 2022 to get rid of the name Fort Bragg. Now, Trump is bringing that name back. We're talking 3 years later. So there's a little bit of inflation on that. I'm pointing it out for the obvious reason. Is it worth it? Now, I know before my MAGA side starts saying, hell yeah, it's worth it to rename this base, to stick it to the liberals, we're doing this at a time when people are getting fired from their jobs. Think about the amount of jobs you could save by not spending whatever amount in millions it takes to rename these bases. That could easily be a dozen people's jobs or more. Is it really worth doing that? Now, like I said, I understand if you want to stick it to the libs, you don't give a shit about an American job in comparison to sticking it to the liberals. You want to stick it to the liberals even if it results in 100 people getting fired. But you could be saving jobs. They're firing people all over the damn country. And they got money to rename bases? I don't know how much it's going to cost to rename Black Lives Matter Plaza or whatever the hell it's called, which it shouldn't have never been done to begin with. That was done to stick it to Trump. And Trump is now taking revenge and sticking it back to the liberals. And they're doing all of this shit with our tax money. If you thought it was wrong when Biden did it, you should think it's wrong now. But unfortunately, in our tribalistic society, everybody just wants to win regardless of the cost. Which leads to the obvious question, are we really concerned with wasteful spending, fraud, and abuse at all? Or are we just more concerned with winning? Because this is easily going to be double-digit millions that are spent to go around renaming all of this stuff back after perceived heroes of the Confederacy. To name all these bases, because it ain't just Bragg, it's not just Fort Benning. There are other bases out there that HEXF intends to rename as well. That's millions of dollars. While we're openly boasting that we're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, terminating people from their jobs, people who are being unemployed, potentially losing their homes and things like that, while we got money to do this. Tell me how that makes sense if you are genuinely attempting to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. Or are we just doing all of this for show? Let me know that in the comments, because I'm totally baffled that we got money to do this while people are actually getting fired. As always, feel free to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.